If the gods will not rescue my people, then I will do what I must. Today, we're going to talk about the Remastered Oracle in Pathfinder 2nd Edition as I share my Anathamaru build on today's episode of the Local Disaster Tour Guide. Hello travelers and tourists, my name is Mark and I am the Local Disaster Tour Guide. That's right, I am a storyteller who really misread some stuff when Howl of the Wild first came out, and I'm here to laugh about that today. Welcome to a journey through the fantastic world of TTRPGs like Pathfinder and Starfinder, and welcome to my Anathamaru build for Pathfinder 2nd Edition, highlighting some of the changes with the Remastered Oracle from Player Core 2. So let me go ahead and explain the goofy premise of this video. A few months ago, Howl of the Wild released, and when it first released, for some reason, my brain just refused to read the name of one of the new Ancestries correctly. The new fishfolk that were presented in Howl of the Wild are known as the Athamaru, but for some reason, my brain, for the span of about 3.5 weeks, kept insisting that the correct pronunciation was Anathamaru, a horrible mangling of the ancestry name Athamaru with the term anathema that is used to describe actions that are forbidden by a religion in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Seriously, it kind of drove me crazy. I knew the term was wrong, but I couldn't get it out of my head. This naturally led me to the only response that a nerd can possibly have in this situation, which is to ask, well, how would I stat an Anathamaru? And then that turned into, how would I play an Anathamaru? And I started researching on the best way to build an Anathamaru in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. That is, a character whose explicit goal is to violate as many tenets of as many religions in the Golarion campaign setting as is entirely possible. Yes, this build is an experiment in the absurd, and yes, I have spent way too much time on this. In a conversation with friend of the channel, Goat King from Goat King Dice, he mentioned that the Oracle would be the perfect class to capture such a blasphemous individual, and immediately I realized that is the case. The Oracle is a character that has access to divine magic outside of the permission and will of the gods, and immediately the premise for a video was born. By the way, if you want to check out a video of me and the Goat King going over some of the new ancestries from Howl in the Wild, I'll throw a link up here. Still, knowing that Player Core 2 was on the horizon, I decided that I would save the build for the arrival of the new Oracle rules, and now that Player Core 2 is upon us, I have the opportunity to finally present the build for the Anathamaru and make it somewhat relevant to actual conversations in the community by also discussing and highlighting many of the changes for the Oracle in the remaster throughout this video. So in this video, my goals are, first and foremost, to laugh at how terrible my brain is at reading sometimes, and then also to highlight some of the things that you can expect to see from the Remastered Oracle if you pick up Player Core 2. Combining those two elements allows me to pretend that this video has at least some reason to be up on this channel. Still, before we go any farther, I'm going to have my only serious conversation in this entire video, which is this. In this video, the character concept that I'm going to be presenting is going to draw upon, in some instances, what are exaggerated versions of arguments that you might hear in debates between people who are religious and people who are atheists. Now, I know that my community is absolutely fantastic, and I love how respectful you all always are. Still, I just want to warn you, for anyone who wants to miss the joke of this video and try to use my comments section as an opportunity to try to dunk on someone who's religious or dunk on someone who's an atheist, you are free to do that. It feeds the algorithm either way for me, but I am warning you, I am a teacher, and if you are posting rude comments in my comment section, I will assign you some ridiculous build that you have to make in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, and when you turn it in, I will grade it in a video on this channel. You have been warned. Seriously, I do hope you all find this build entertaining and like some of the ideas I put forward for it, and I would love to hear your ideas about how you might expand on this concept or what you might do differently, but as always, please be respectful in the comment section when you do so. That, of course, bridges nicely into the YouTuber stuff that you get to hear in every video. If you enjoy this video, please remember to like, share, and subscribe. You can check out my free Discord or my Patreon. All of those links will be in the video description. And once Archives of Nethys gets updated with this remastered content, I'll also try to throw some links to the stuff I'm using in this build down in the video description so that you can go and check those things out as well. But with all that out of the way, let's get started. Okay, so for this build video, we have to begin first with the most complex part of this build video, which is actually defining what we mean by saying we are going to build the Anathamaru. Now obviously when we get to the Ancestry portion of the build, we'll be going with the Athamaru from Howl of the Wild. That portion is obvious, but the Anathema portion of the build is where we're going to have to define a little more particularly exactly what this build is and means. So let me pitch the concept and then dive into what we're aiming for with the build. The concept here is very simple. The Athamaru are presented as a very community-minded ancestry. It is very important to them to look out for their community, to look out for the people that they live with, and many Athamaru communities can unintentionally become very insular because they become very distrustful of outsiders who they view as threats to their community. So for this particular build, what I am imagining is an Athamaru leader who has seen several major tragedies or misfortunes befall their community and who has, as a result, become especially distrustful of and antagonistic towards religious faith. Essentially, this character blames the misfortunes of their community on the gods and has sought out the power necessary to protect their community in spite of the gods. You're already aware that we're going to be going with the Oracle for this build, and the premise behind that is the Anathamaru has essentially sought to steal divine power from the gods because they view the gods as entities who are misusing that power, and so they don't deserve that power. Stepping beyond this basic introduction, what this means functionally for the roleplay of the Anathamaru is that this character actively strives to do things that would be considered offensive to various religions, or in game terms, they deliberately seek to perform anathema of various deities as their means of stealing divine power. Now, that description is pretty simple, and I could stop there, but I wanted to dig just a little bit more. I wanted to go to some absurd lengths, so I challenged myself to actually look at the core 20 deities of the Golarion campaign setting and actively create a character that could break an anathema of every single core deity in the Golarion campaign setting. Now, that is a little bit tricky because, well, the War of the Immortals is about to begin. This video will be going live approximately 4 hours before I hit the road to drive to Gen Con. By the way, if you're going to be at Gen Con, I hope to see you there. I will be doing another round of Gen Con Silly Surveys, so if you catch me at Gen Con and want to make an appearance on this channel, let me know and I will let you do a Gen Con Silly Survey. But with the War of the Immortals on the horizon, that means that one deity, Gorom, is about to leave the Core 20, and another deity, Arasni, is about to enter the Core 20. So if I'm being really technical to when this video goes live, I need to do Gorom, but if I want to be really technical to who might be watching this video next week, I need to do Arasni, so naturally I just did both. Yes, that's right, I identified 21 different anathema for my character to break as a result of this build, because I love a good absurd challenge. So let's discuss those really fast. Some of the deities are going to be pretty easy to create a character that can perform anathema to the deity. Some of the deities are a little bit more vague, and I just kind of had to create a character whose vibes are off in one way or another. We'll go over the details here in a minute, but one of the things that I've tried to do is I've tried to tie specific game mechanics to each anathema that this character is able to perform. So, taking a look at the core deities for Golarion, first up we have Abadar. Abadar is opposed to things like banditry, piracy, and stealing, so that one's pretty easy. Steal something and you've broken the rules. Up next we have Asmodeus, and Asmodeus absolutely hates contract breakers, so I need someone who is willing to violate a contract at the drop of a hat. Calistria is a little bit difficult for this build. As a goddess that loves a good revenge plot, she seems like she would actually support the character that I am pitching, but one of Calistria's anathema is to allow a slight to go unanswered. The Anathamaru that I'm designing is willing to let a slight go unanswered because she's not focused on getting revenge, she's focused on protecting her people. Caden Kalian and Desna both present some anathema that are pretty easy to hit. Caden Kalian hates anyone who engages in oppressive activities, and Desna's anathema specifically prohibits inflicting fear or despair on people, and if you cross one of those lines, you've probably hit both. And Erastil, while he is very community-minded, hates it when people tell lies, which is something that the Anathamaru is more than willing to do. For the short time that Gorham remains with us, it is worth noting that Gorham is opposed to negotiation and underhanded tactics, both of which the Anathamaru will be able to employ. And many deities, such as Gazra, Serinre, and Pharasma, all have the anathema of creating undead, which, spoiler alert, the Anathamaru is more than willing to do. Iomade has an anathema against dishonoring yourself, and the Anathamaru has no honor. They'll do whatever they need to do in order to protect their kin. And Torag, much like Eristil and Iomade, is opposed to people who lie or cheat, so again that's fairly easy to break. The last deity that presents a fairly easy to break anathema is Zon-Kuthon, as Zon-Kuthon instructs his followers never to provide comfort. But as the Anathamaru is a leader in their community, comforting their kin is a major part of who they are. For all of those deities, the anathema that this character would perform in order to steal some divine power, they are pretty obvious and straightforward. However, there are some other deities that are a little bit trickier to figure out. First up, let's talk about Irori and Shelyn. While they don't seem to be the sort of deities that would support the Anathamaru, by the same token, their general sphere of influence is not necessarily something that overlaps with the Anathamaru's focus. Still, the Anathamaru is an equal opportunity offender, so they will gladly offend Irori with the destruction of historical text, and they will gladly offend Shelyn with the destruction of beautiful artwork, if that is something that they can do in order to dishearten or disorient those they consider to be a threat to their community. Another deity that doesn't seem like it would necessarily be problematic for the Anathamaru is Urgathoa, the first undead. The Anathamaru is willing to create undead, and Urgathoa encourages undeath. How are we going to handle this one? Well, it is worth noting that Urgathoa explicitly has the anathema destroy undead. And the thing about the Anathamaru is, undead are a tool to be used, not a particular state to be aspired to. So we're going to give the Anathamaru the capacity to destroy undead very efficiently, and that should cover Urgathoa. Another evil deity that at first glance seems like it wouldn't be much of a problem would be Rovagug, who is very destructive and not really particular about where his ire is targeted. However, there are teachings for the followers of Rovagug, and one of those is an anathema that explicitly forbids creating something new. And it is worth noting that the Anathamaru is not just mindlessly destructive, they are actually trying to build their community. So our Anathamaru will have some creative abilities that specifically allow them to anger Rovagug in addition to everybody else that they've offended. This leaves us with 4 final deities that we need to hit the Anathema for, and these are probably the trickiest of the bunch. Lamashtu, Nethys, Nagorber, and Arosni. Up first we have Lamashtu, the Mother of Monsters. You would think that a leader of an Athamaru community, seeking to preserve and protect their kin, would fall under the general domain of Lamashtu, but there is one anathema that sticks out that I think is important here. Lamashtu expressly forbids for her followers to change something about themselves that makes them different. For our Anathamaru, their focus is on the survival of the community, and if something needs to change in order to keep their people safe, they're willing to do it, and in so doing, it also allows them to cross the anathema of Lamashtu. Next up we have Nethys, who really only concerns themselves with the use of magic. They don't care how magic is used, they just want magic to be used. If there's any deity that wouldn't have a problem with oracles, Nethys seems like they would be it. And while that is true, it is still worth noting there are anathema to Nethys' church, and one of those anathema is to pursue mundane paths over magical paths. One of the things that we're going to do with our Anathamaru build is allow them to diversify into mundane and non-magical options in addition to their magical options, meaning that they will turn their back on magic if it is not what is going to adequately protect them and their kin. Norgorber is a god of secrets and lies and assassination, and as someone who is willing to fight dirty, they seem like a deity that would be very much aligned with the actions of the Athamaru, but I found an anathema that can apply to them too. Norgorber forbids his followers from associating their true name with their actions. Essentially, Norgorber teaches that you have to keep your identity a secret whenever you are doing these dark and dangerous things. Well, as should be obvious for the Anathamaru, they are a leader of their community, and they have no problem with their identity being well known. This stance flies in the face of Norgorber and Norgorber's teachings, so it will cross the anathema of Norgorber and allow our character concept to hold. Alright, we've got one deity left. It's the newest one that's going to be coming to the Core 20 here very soon, and that is Arosni. And I'll go ahead and tell you, Arosni was actually one of the trickiest ones for me to figure out for this build. The way that Arosni is presented in lore, they are very much a very bitter person, and the bitterness of the character of Arosni kind of matches the bitterness of the Anathamaru that I've created for their story, and I had a little bit of trouble figuring this one out, but I did find an anathema that will work, which is Arosni expressly prohibits the creation of unwilling undead. So, as long as our Anathamaru is willing to create undead against the will of the target, so as long as our Anathamaru is willing to create undead against the will of the target, that will give us a character that can officially perform at least one anathema for every single core deity in the Golarion campaign setting. Okay, so now we've got all of the anathema that we're targeting. What does that mean for the mechanics of this character build? Well, I'm dividing this into two rough categories of what I'm aiming for. There are the skills that the character has, and the magical abilities that the character can call upon. In particular, I've identified 10 different skills that the Anathamaru must be trained in during the course of the character build, and if they are trained in these 10 skills, they have the capacity to formally and effectively perform the anathema of multiple deities. These skills are athletics, crafting, diplomacy, deception, thievery, survival, society, intimidation, stealth, religion, and medicine. As long as our character is trained in these 10 skills, they have these skills to effectively perform anathema against 14 of the 21 deities that we have targeted for this video, and you will see in the list on screen which deities have anathema associated with these skills in question. Now, I'll go ahead and tell you, some of these skills are more important for our build than others, so things like deception and intimidation are going to rank a lot higher than things like athletics, but we still want to have all of these by the end of the build. The other portion of the build are the magical abilities that we need to touch upon in order to cross the other 7 deities off our list. Functionally, we need the ability to create undead, summon undead, destroy undead, manipulate souls, and finally, break things. Again, you will see in the list on screen the deities who anathema are associated with these magical options, but we need to make sure that the magical abilities we have access to will allow us to cover all of these bases, and so long as all of that is covered, we will officially have a character with the ability to perform anathema for all of the core deities in the Golarion campaign setting. Now, as to this list of skills and list of magical abilities, with some deities in the Golarion setting, you can actually cover the anathema of that deity with kind of both halves of this list, but I just needed to make sure that every deity was on this list in at least one of the 2 categories. So, with all of those goals clearly labeled, the time has come. How do we build the Anathamaru in Pathfinder 2nd Edition? Well, let's talk ABCs. Now, one thing I would like to note in going through this build is, for the purposes of this build, I've tried to highlight the things that I consider to be either necessary choices or very strong choices for this particular concept. But at the same time, when it comes to choices that are not as important, I've tried to leave those open so that if you're actually interested in this character concept, you could take this character in whatever way was the best fit for your game. So that does mean that for several points in this build, there are going to be places where I'm going to say, you can take whatever you want, or here's a few ideas, go with the one you think is the best fit. But I've tried to leave some flexibility, and one of the major points where there is a lot of flexibility in this build is with the very first part of the build, the A equals Ancestry, and that is the Athamaru. The reality is, beyond my complete inability to read, there is nothing about the Athamaru that says you have to build this concept with an Athamaru. We are only stuck with the Athamaru in this video because of my comic misunderstanding. But that does mean that very early on in this build, there's going to be a lot of flexibility in how you want to approach the character. In fact, there's really only one choice for the Athamaru that I think is an absolute necessity, and that is the heritage that we're going to be going for, which is the Hopeful Athamaru heritage. This is the heritage that represents an Athamaru that has deliberately undergone a transformation so that they can become an Athamaru matriarch. Now, it's worth noting that word matriarch is not actually a gendered term for the Athamaru. An Athamaru leader can be male or female. That's just the term that they use for the leaders of their communities. But an Athamaru who is stepping into a leadership role will deliberately undergo some physical changes that help to distinguish them from the rest of the community so it is very visibly obvious who's in charge. Specifically, the Hopeful Athamaru heritage is going to make our Anathamaru large size. That in and of itself is pretty nice and pairs well with these suggested boosts and flaws. Athamaru typically start off with a free boost in strength, and that does pair pretty well with a large size ancestry. But from a more role-playing oriented perspective, essentially what the Hopeful Athamaru heritage is going to do is it's going to make it very visibly obvious that our character is the leader. However, that's not the only bonus from our heritage. Our heritage is also going to put an aura around our Anathamaru, giving all of their allies a +1 bonus on saves versus fear effects. The presence of an Athamaru matriarch brings a sense of resolve and courage to their community, and you will naturally have this influence as a leader. So given the character concept of the Anathamaru, I think that the Hopeful Athamaru is the right choice for the heritage, but past that point, you actually have a lot of freedom and flexibility about what you would like to do. I'll be honest, there are no must-take Athamaru feats for this build. There are a few first-level Athamaru Ancestry feats that I think could play well into this concept. The Athamaru Lore feat and the Ocean's Wariness feat both feel particularly relevant to our character concept. The Ocean's Wariness feat is going to raise your DC against things like deception that people might try to use against you. That seems on brand for this character. And then the Athamaru lore Ancestry feat is going to give us training in athletics, which is one of the 10 skills that we highlighted earlier, as well as nature and Athamaru lore. While those latter two skills aren't strictly necessary for the build, they would both be welcome inclusions, and there's no reason to think that our character wouldn't want to have those skills. So the Athamaru lore Ancestry feat is definitely a good option that you could take as well. And beyond those two first level Ancestry feat options, the only other feats that kind of jump out to me are the various defensive odor feats that the Athamaru Ancestry can access. Essentially for the Athamaru, there is a line of Ancestry feats that is all about your character's ability to just spray this vile poison on people who get too close to you as a sort of defensive reaction, as a way of protecting yourself and maybe protecting your community. And while it's not strictly necessary for the build that we're going for, the idea of an Athamaru that can just spray these offensive odors all over the place anytime they walk into a temple of a deity they don't like kind of seems on brand. So for me personally, I would probably take several of those feats for this build, but they are not strictly necessary, and when you're looking at the Athamaru Ancestry feats, really you can take anything that you think plays into your campaign or the version of the character that you're creating. There's nothing that's just an absolute must pick. Now before we leave the Ancestry portion of the build, I do want to take a moment and talk about one of the challenges of the build, which is the fact that we identified 10 specific skills that we need for this build. The Oracle is a spellcasting class that doesn't really come with a lot of skill proficiencies, and the suggested boosts and flaws for the Athamaru are a little bit problematic. Essentially, if you go with the suggested ones in Howl of the Wild, the Athamaru is going to be coming with a flaw to intelligence. If you take a character with a flaw to intelligence and put them on a class like Oracle that doesn't have a large number of base skills, that does make it a little bit difficult to get up to the sizable number of skills that this build actually needs. So let's talk practicality for a second. You have some options here. Building off the idea of the Oracle class and the fact that you're ultimately going to need at least 10 trained skills, at the end of the character build, you're probably going to need an intelligence modifier of +3 or +4. In this instance, I'm assuming it's +3 if you took the Athamaru lore feat as a first level Ancestry feat, or +4 if you didn't. You can modify that with skill training feats and things like that, so it's not a hardline rule, but you are going to need to make a at least serious investment in intelligence over the course of your character build, so when you first start the character, you have a choice you need to make. I think that you can use the suggested boosts and flaws. If you do that, when you get to the 4 free boosts step, you really want to make sure that you come in and put one of those free boosts in intelligence to offset your starting flaw. I think that's a very important investment early on in the game, just so you're not stressing to hit your goals by the end of the character build. But you also have the option of the universally available alternative boost, which is just 2 free boosts, no flaws, that any Ancestry can use. And if you go that route, you just ignore the intelligence flaw entirely, and then you can either boost intelligence early or wait until a little bit later in the game to do it. It's up to you which approach you want to go. Just be aware you're going to need some intelligence on this build, so think about that when you first start building your character. Now next up we have the B, which is background, and when we get to background, we still need to be careful about the choices we make because of the skill issue that we've already discussed. Like I mentioned, ultimately this character needs to be trained in at least 10 skills, and we're going for a build that is a little bit skill starved, so what that functionally means is we need to make sure that we are picking a background that has one of those 10 skills that we've previously mentioned. We need to make sure that our background is getting us closer to the goal. That's just going to be a requirement in this case. Now, the good news is you've got 10 skills to work with, and if you go on a site like Archives of Nethys, You can sort the backgrounds by which skill they offer you. So what I recommend doing at this point is picking out a couple of skills that you think are particularly important for your version of the Anathamaru, and sorting backgrounds by those skills, and then looking at those skills and the skill feat that you get from your background, and using that to guide what is the best selection. Now, if that sounds like a lot of work, don't worry. I've gone ahead and highlighted 6 backgrounds that I think are reasonable fits for the Anathamaru. They are Bandit, Deep Sea Diver, Deputy, Emissary, Insurgent, and Noble. Emissary and Noble will both give you access to the Society skill, while Bandit will give you access to Intimidation, Deputy will give you access to Survival, Deep Sea Diver will give you Athletics, and Insurgent will give you Deception. Each of these offers a skill that is relevant to the build that we're creating, though if I had to pick a top 2 from this list, my favorites are Deep Sea Diver and Insurgent. Now, Deep Sea Diver is a little bit of a strange pick, but it's going to give you Athletics and access to the Underwater Marauder skill feat. As you are a character who naturally has a swimming speed, this is a pretty useful skill feat for you, and it represents a tactic you can readily exploit to the advantage of you and your team. However, the one that I like even more is Insurgent, which really speaks to the idea of leader of a community of Athamaru who are angry at their neighbors. I feel like Insurgent really hits the vibe of this build on the nose. Insurgent is going to give you Deception, which is one of the most important skills for this entire build, and it's also going to give you access to the Lengthy Diversion skill feat, which will allow your character to employ some pretty dirty tactics in defense of your community. So if I had to pick a top 2 options for background, Deep Sea Diver and Insurgent both feel like really good picks, but really at the end of the day, as long as you pick a background that corresponds to one of the 10 skills we highlighted earlier, you should be okay. Side note on this topic, while you don't absolutely have to do it, I wouldn't worry so much about backgrounds that give you either the Religion or Medicine skill, because we will pick those up automatically with the Oracle class here in a minute. And while picking a background with one of those 2 skills doesn't automatically throw off our build, they're also not particularly important at this stage in the build, so I wouldn't evaluate those as highly at this particular point. So now we come to the core of our build, which is our class, which is what we're going to use to steal the divine power from the gods. Obviously for this build we're going Oracle, that much is already obvious, but let's go ahead and flesh that out a little bit before we dive into the specifics. First off, one of our major choices is our Oracle's Mystery, and for this build we're going to be going with the Bones Oracle, the Oracle that messes around with the boundary between life and death. Given some of the previous conversations, I think you know where that is going, but thematically it's going to tie in nicely to a lot of the things we're trying to do. The other thing I want to go ahead and note is, for purposes of this build, I'm going to be combining the Oracle with the Ritualist Archetype from Player Core 2. The Anathamaru very much strikes me as a character who is willing to use all sorts of dark and risky rituals as a means of furthering their goal and protecting their kin, and the Ritualist Archetype just feels like it's very spot on to the concept that we're working with here. And given the Oracle's fascination with accessing magic through dangerous means, I think Ritualist plays into that very naturally. So I feel like pairing Oracle with Ritualist is just a perfect match for what we're going for in this video. Now I will say, for purposes of this video, I am assuming a completely standard game of Pathfinder 2nd Edition for the build that I am offering. Essentially what that means is no free archetype. I realize there are a ton of tables that play with the free archetype rules, and if you're at a table that uses the free archetype rules, then very obviously what you would do here is Oracle would be your main class, and then you would just use the Ritualist archetype for the free archetype that you get, and functionally that's just going to free up some extra options over here on the Oracle side of the equation. I'm going to have several spots that are going to be open in terms of Oracle class choices, and essentially what I'm doing there is giving you space to fill out some of the feats from the Ritualist archetype or if you're using free Archetype, to go back over to the Oracle and pick up some extra Oracle class feats, particularly Cursebound feats, which we will be talking about here in a moment. Now, when it comes to the Oracle in the Pathfinder 2e Remaster, a lot of stuff about the Oracle is still going to be the same. It's still a charisma-based class, it still uses the divine spellcasting tradition. A lot of the things that you saw in the legacy version of 2e, those are going to remain true about the updated version of the Oracle in the Remaster. Essentially, the Remastered Oracle is going to come down to 3 major changes with 3 major abilities that the Oracle has. The first major change, which doesn't have a lot to do with the build in this video, is the Oracle just gets more spell slots. Seriously, it's pretty cool. They bumped up the number of spell slots that Oracles can use. It's just a straight power increase for the Oracles, but beyond the types of spells we want to put into those slots, not particularly relevant to the conversation in this video, so we're going to set that particular point aside, and instead talk about 2 major Oracle features that have changed and what they look like in the Remaster. That is the Oracle's Mystery and their Curse. So the premise of the Oracle as a class is you are a divine spellcaster who has access to divine magic, but without the protection and blessing of the gods. You have effectively stumbled into some sort of divine mystery, and in accessing that mystery you have gained all sorts of incredible powers, but that power comes at a price. Now, narratively, this is already golden. A lot of people didn't like the legacy version of the Oracle mechanically, but still agreed that the narrative potential of the Oracle was amazing. This idea of power at a price, that is absolutely something that is fun to portray. It's really one of the big selling points of the class, and that is very much still present here. As an Oracle, you have gained access to a mystery, you've gotten all sorts of cool, amazing powers from that mystery, but as a result of that mystery, you are also cursed. And in the Pathfinder 2e Remaster, the way that Paizo approaches the mystery and the curse is the major change with the class that you want to be mindful of. Now, I don't want to go too deep into the legacy version of the Oracle, but essentially the mechanical problem of the Oracle originally is this mystery and this curse were incredibly entangled in such a way that it was kind of hard to parse out the benefits and the drawbacks of your mystery and curse, and it was very difficult to manage for players. What Paizo has done with the Remaster is, even though the mystery and the curse are very much tied together, they've made it where they are very mechanically distinct. The good stuff is all mystery, and the downsides and drawbacks are all curse. So let's go ahead and talk about the drawbacks first. Let's talk about the curse. Every mystery is going to come with a specific curse, and the way you track that curse for your character is with a unique condition called Cursebound. Every Oracle, and only Oracles, have this trait called Cursebound, which tracks how much their curse is presently influencing them. At the start of the day, you may have some minor effects related to your curse, but they are essentially fluff and flavor text. However, throughout the adventuring day, you may find yourself calling upon particularly powerful options that the Oracle can access, and these are options that have a trait called Cursebound. Every Oracle at first level will get a class feat that has the Cursebound trait, and if you use that class feat, whatever action it gives you, then it raises your Cursebound condition by 1. So the first time you use a Cursebound action, your Cursebound condition becomes 1, the second time you use it becomes 2, and then later it can go up to 3 or 4. Now at low levels, you're capped out at Cursebound 2. Once you hit Cursebound 2, you can't use any more Cursebound actions, because the strength of the curse is just overwhelming you. However, starting at level 11, you can go up to Cursebound 3, and at level 17, you can go up to Cursebound 4. You can also bring your Cursebound status back down, and you do this by using the Refocus Exploration activity. So, while your character is refocusing, you're also bringing down the effects of your curse. If you're at Cursebound 2 and you refocus, you regain your focus point like you normally would, and you also lower your Cursebound down to 1. If you refocus again, you can actually bring your Cursebound down to 0, negating the penalties of being Cursebound until at least you start using Cursebound actions again. Every single mystery for the Oracle will have a specific associated curse. These are set in stone. Whichever mystery you pick is going to tell you exactly what your curse is, and then for each stage of the curse, it's going to tell you exactly what penalties you have. I've already mentioned that we're going to be going with the Bones mystery for the Oracle. This is the mystery that centers around the idea of life and death and the thin barrier between. Well, the Bones mystery is going to come with a curse called the Curse of Living Death. Essentially, by playing around with the powers that toy the line between life and death, you ultimately risk placing your character in a state where you are susceptible to the dangers that might afflict both the living and the dead. So to give some examples of what a Cursebound penalty might look like, for the Curse of Living Death, if you are Cursebound 1, you have Weakness 2 against both Vitality and Void damage. Doesn't matter if you're living or dead, you have weakness to both, and as long as you are Cursebound, any resistance or immunity to those damage types is automatically suppressed. And then, if you move up to Cursebound 2, you take a -1 penalty to your Fortitude saves. Later on, if you go up to Cursebound 3, your weakness to Vitality and Void increases by a very drastic amount. Your weakness to Vitality and Void damage goes up to 5 plus your level. Again, resistances and immunity to these damage types do not apply to you. And then finally, if you hit Cursebound 4, your Fortitude penalty increases to a -2. Torn between both sides of the veil, your character finds themselves susceptible to the dangers of the living and the dead, and has a harder time resisting those dangers as a result. Now obviously I should say at this point that every single mystery is going to have its own curse, and so the specific penalties associated with Cursebound 1, 2, 3, and 4, those are going to change from mystery to mystery, from curse to curse. And obviously in this video I'm not diving into every single one of those, but the cool thing that Paizo has done here is they've made this Cursebound condition very easy to track. It's very obvious what influences it, it's very obvious how it goes up, it's very obvious how it goes down, and it makes it a lot easier for a player to manage. Also, one of the cool things about the new curse for the Oracles is the Cursebound trait, by and large, is attached to Oracle class feats, not Oracle spells. In other words, you're typically not going to be risking your Cursebound trait because you cast a spell, but rather because you used a specific Oracle ability. Given that the Oracle is a spellcasting class, making spellcasting safer to use for the Oracle is probably a good thing overall, and something that Oracle players everywhere are happy to see. But now that we've talked about the curse of the Bones Oracle, let's go back over to the mystery and ask, what benefits do we get as a result of the choice that we've made? So when you select your mystery, it's actually going to come with a lot of benefits. It's going to give you a trained skill, it's going to give you a first level Oracle class feat, it's going to give you some granted spells, it's going to give you a revelation spell, which is the name for the Oracle focus spells, and then finally it's going to potentially give you access to some divine domains. Let's break these down. Starting with the easy ones, the trained skill for the Bones Oracle is going to be medicine, and as a caretaker for your community, this is a skill that we definitely needed, glad to have it. As for the granted Oracle class feat, you're going to get a feat called Nudge the Scales. This is a single action activity with the Cursebound trait that allows you to point at a target within 30 feet and heal them for 2 plus your level points of damage. Bear in mind that the ranged version of the heal or harm spell takes 2 actions to cast, and you realize this is a very efficient heal that is going to scale pretty nicely throughout the game. This is a quick action that you can pop off to help different members of your team without much effort, and it's a pretty nice action economy. Now the obvious trade-off of Nudge the Scales is, every time you use this action, you are increasing your Cursebound condition, so all of those penalties we talked about earlier, those are going to be in force. But still, as a way of keeping your team up, it's a pretty nice action to have. The other thing that Nudge the Scales is going to allow you to do is, at the start of the day, you can decide whether your Anathamaru counts as a living or dead creature for purposes of how they interact with vitality and void damage inside of the game. This is something you can freely switch up and adjust to whatever the needs of your party might be. Moving on from there, every single mystery is going to offer a selection of 4 granted spells, 1 cantrip, and 3 other spells that are added to your Oracle's repertoire. Now, these are added to your repertoire when you gain access to spells that are high enough level to cast them, but you don't have to do anything extra once you get to that level. As soon as you're high enough level, it's available. For the Bones Mystery, we're going to get the cantrip Void Warp, and then as a first level spell, we're going to get the Grim Tendril spell, which is low-key one of my favorite new spells in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Like, I didn't pick the Bones Mystery just to get Grim Tendrils, but it's a pretty sweet bonus and very thematic to our build today. And then later on, as a second rank spell, we'll get access to False Vitality, and as a third rank spell, we'll get access to Ghostly Weapon, which are both pretty solid options. Each mystery is also going to come with a list of 3 revelation spells. These are your focus spells, and they follow the normal rules for focus spells. Your Oracle will begin play with your initial focus spell, and you can pick up the other 2 focus spells through class feats throughout your character progression. I'll go ahead and tell you for the Anathamaru, we are going to pick up all of the revelation spells. I think they are all thematic for this character, so I went ahead and picked them all up in this build. However, for the revelation spells themselves, we're going to start with the initial revelation spell, Soul Siphon, which literally allows you to just drain HP from another creature. And then for our other revelation spell options, we have the advanced revelation spell of Armor of Bones, and the greater revelation spell, Claim Undead. Armor of Bones is going to be a single action focus spell that gives us a lot of different damage resistances for a minute. And then Claim Undead, which is straight up how this character is going to tick off a Rosny, is a 2-action focus spell that allows you to subvert the will of an undead creature and make it subservient to you. Very thematic for the character that we're building. Absolutely love it. Definitely need to take it. The final thing that your Oracle Mystery is going to give you is access to a list of 4 domains. Now, this is kind of an optional rule set for your Oracle, but basically every mystery comes with 4 domains, and through the use of Oracle class feats, you can go in and take the initial domain power and possibly even the advanced domain power. Even though you're not actually the servant of a deity, you can still get some of those powers like a cleric might be able to command. Again, this is kind of optional for oracles. You don't have to go this route if you don't want to, but you can get some pretty sweet options if you're so inclined. For the Bones Mystery Oracle, the 4 domains that you can choose are Death, Decay, Undeath, and Vigil. And I'll go ahead and tell you that for the character concept that we've been discussing, all 4 of these domains actually feel like pretty good choices. Like, honestly, I wouldn't blame you for picking any of those 4. However, as to the question, are we going to take some domain powers? Yes, definitely. This character is stealing the power of the gods, so we're definitely taking some domain powers. But as a functional question, which domain do I think is the best fit? Having looked at the 4 domains offered to the Bones Mystery, I think the Death domain is the best fit, so that's the one I've chosen for this build. However, if you decided to switch it out for one of the other 3, I would not blame you. So, since we already know that we're going to be taking some Death domain powers, let's go ahead and talk about what those are so we know what we'll be picking up. The initial Death domain power is called Death's Call, and this is a focus spell that you can use as a reaction when a living creature or an undead creature that is close enough to you dies. You can just kind of absorb essence off of that creature, strengthening yourself. Pretty cool reaction and very thematic to the character we've created. And then the advanced option for the Death domain, which is 100% how we're ticking off Urgathoa, is a focus spell called Eradicate Death. Is a focus spell called Eradicate Undeath. This is a huge cone attack that deals obscene amounts of vitality damage to any undead creatures in a cone in front of you. It's powerful, it's brutal, And if you need to shut down some undead that are coming after your community, there are a few options quite as wonderful as this might be. So again, when it comes to focus spells, we will start with the initial revelation spell of Soul Siphon, and we will pick up the advanced and greater revelation spells for the Bones Mystery, and the initial and advanced domain spell for the Death Domain, giving us 5 focus spells all told. Now, we will still cap out at the normal 3 focus points, but that's going to give us a wide array of magical options that we can use, and they are all very thematic to our character, so I feel like they are appropriate choices here. So now let's step back and look at class feats and ask where we're going to be picking these up and what class feats we need to take for this build. Now, as a result of our mystery, we're going to begin at level 1 with Nudge the Scales. That's automatic from our mystery, we already know that. At 2nd level, we want to go ahead and pick up the Oracle class feat, Domain Acumen, and use that to get the initial domain spell for the Death Domain, meaning that at level 2, we'll already have access to 2 of our focus spells. At level 4, this is when we're going to start broadening some of our options. At level 4 is when I recommend picking up the Ritualist Archetype Dedication, which is going to allow you to start unlocking access to various rituals in the game. Now, I'll go ahead and tell you that the base Ritualist Archetype is going to have access to about 10 different rituals just automatically, and your storyteller may allow you to find more. But honestly, that base of 10 rituals is pretty generous, and you can get some good mileage out of it. But at 4th level, go ahead and start working on the Ritualist Archetype and pick up that dedication. At level 6, we're going to go back to our focus spells and pick up the Advanced Revelation spell for the Bones Mystery. And then for levels 8 and 10, I'm leaving these class feat slots open. We'll talk about them more in a moment. And I want to jump ahead to the class feats that we pick up at level 12 and level 14. Between level 12 and 14, we're going to be picking up 2 12th level Oracle class feats. They are Domain Fluency and Greater Revelation. Greater Revelation is going to give you your final revelation spell for the Bones Mystery, and Domain Fluency is going to give you the advanced spell for one of your domains, in this case the advanced spell for the Death Domain. Since both of these are 12th level Oracle class feats, you can take them in either order, it doesn't really matter. Pick the one that you think is more immediately helpful to you, and then pick the other one up when you get to 14th level. You just want to make sure that you're picking up both of these options at level 12 and 14 respectively. Then level 16, 18, and 20, I've left the feat slots at these 3 levels wide open as well, giving us a total of 5 open class feat slots throughout the course of our character progression. So what are we going to do with all of these open feat slots? Level 8, level 10, level 16, level 18, level 20, what are those used for? Well, option number 1 is there are 5 additional archetype feats for the Ritualist, which can easily slot in to these particular points. So if you want to go all in on the Ritualist archetype, then you just take those 5 Ritualist archetype feats, plug them into these slots, you're good to go. However, there is a real possibility you may not want to use all 5 of these feat slots on the Ritualist archetype. First and foremost, maybe you're playing with free archetype like we've mentioned before. In that case, you don't need these slots to fill out the Ritualist archetype. Or, alternatively, even if you're not playing with free archetype, you may look at a couple of the Ritualist archetype feats and think to yourself, this is not as useful for my game. In which case, what you can totally go back and do is look at the Oracle class feats and start looking at some of those really cool Cursebound options. Now, there are a lot of Cursebound feats that you can take, and I'm not going to tell you exactly which ones you have to plug into an open slot, but I will give you a few recommendations that stood out to me. I really enjoyed Whispers of Weakness, Foretell Harm, Debilitating Dichotomy, and Conduit of Void and Vitality. Whispers of Weakness is a Cursebound action that allows you to essentially auto-succeed on a recall knowledge check against a target creature and identify the worst save of that creature. Don't worry about rolling the dice, you can just look at someone and know their weakest point. That's a pretty cool ability, very useful, and I think on point for the theme of this character build. Another fun ability you can pick up is called Foretell Harm, which is a free action after you cast a spell that damages someone. And essentially what you do is you tell them that they're not done suffering, and on the next turn, some additional damage of the exact same type flares back up and strikes them again. Debilitating Dichotomy is a very interesting feat where you spend 2 actions and target one creature, and both you and that creature have to make a save against a pretty heavy dose of mental damage, but whatever your saving throw is 1 degree of success better automatically. So you and the target are both likely to suffer some damage, but theoretically you should come out on top. And then finally you have Conduit of Vitality and Void, which is a 2-action activity that functions like a 3-action version of a heal or harm spell, and on top of that, you get to pick one creature that was affected to either heal some additional hit points or take some additional damage. It is a very action-efficient, powerful AoE with some bonuses to one particular target. It's a pretty neat effect, and it plays with the whole walking the line between life and death that we're going for this character, so I really enjoy that ability, and if you've got some open class feats, it's one I would seriously consider. So that covers the class feat selections we want to make for this character build. Let's talk briefly about the spells and rituals you want to consider for the Anathamaru. Now obviously, any spell that you can pick that's going to make whichever deity you're feuding with at this particular moment angry at you, that's going to be your go-to, but there are some general options to be aware of. Any spell that allows you to inflict severe destruction upon your enemies, especially any spell that allows for sonic damage, is going to be very in tune with your character. And then you also want to consider any spell that allows you to protect your community, or, if necessary, assert control over your community. So for example, spells like Weapon of Judgment or Telepathic Demand would cover these concepts pretty well. Another thing you want to seriously look at is anything that allows you to dabble with that line between life and death. So spells like Heal and Harm are good choices here, and any spell that allows you to deal with the undead is something you definitely want to consider. I would strongly encourage adding Summon Undead as one of your signature spells, and consider other spells like Rouse Skeletons as something you might want to include in your repertoire to kind of lean into that aspect of the character. Flipping over to the Ritualist Archetype side of the build, as I mentioned, you will get 10 rituals automatically, and your storyteller may allow you to pick up more beyond that. Glancing through the rituals that are mentioned in the Player Core 1 and Player Core 2, I highlighted 7 that I felt like were strong picks for the Anathamaru. These are Ward Domain, Inveigle, Gathering Call, Fantastic Facade, Clone, Call Spirit, and, most importantly, Create Undead. This last one should be a big role-playing point for your character, as you're not going to let something like Death allow the gods to get their hands on your followers. No, they're still under your care. When it comes to spells and rituals, obviously diversify based on the needs of your story and your campaign, but those are just some suggestions that I think are pretty strong for the Anathamaru. Now, there are a few other areas of character building that we haven't talked about so far, but the cool thing is, from this point, you honestly have a ton of flexibility, and you can take a lot of the other details about the Anathamaru in whatever direction serves your story and your campaign the best. However, I do have a few suggestions, so I want to go ahead and talk about skill increases, skill feats, and general feats. Starting first with skill increases. Now early on we identified a set of 10 skills that correspond to many of the anathema that this character performs in their efforts to steal divine power, and all 10 of those skills are things that we want to pick up. For purposes of this build, I feel like 4 skills are truly standout skills that you really want to lean into, and those 4 skills are Religion, Medicine, Deception, and Intimidation. And if you wanted to add a 5th, Diplomacy might get tagged on at the end. Essentially, the Religion skill is going to give your character the knowledge base that they need to defy the gods and steal their power, and the Medicine skill is going to be the core of how you take care of your allies. As for Deception and Intimidation, and diplomacy if you want to add that in, those are charisma-based skills, and as a charisma-based spellcasting class, these are skills you are very naturally going to be able to push, allowing you to dominate social situations to the advantage of your community. Now you will kind of need to decide, is deception or intimidation the one that you want to lean into a little bit harder, and exactly how relatively important those two skills are, but both of them are pretty powerful and worth strong consideration. So when you're picking your skill increases for the Anathamaru, I would prioritize some combination of religion, medicine, deception, and intimidation, and if you want to mix one more in there, diplomacy's a good fifth. Now let's move on and talk about general feats, where really there is only one general feat that I feel is extremely helpful, and that is the Ancestral Paragon general feat, which will allow you to pick up an additional first level Ancestry feat. And you may remember all the way back from our discussion of the Ancestry that there are several options for the Athamaru at first level that are pretty on point for this character. So I do like the idea of taking a general feat to pick up a few more of those options. However, beyond that, there aren't any other general feats that I consider just absolutely mandatory for this build, and you can pick up whatever you think is the best fit for your campaign. One of the things you may very seriously want to consider is using some of those general feats to pick up some extra skill feats throughout the course of your character build. That is a completely valid option here, and could allow you to lean into some skills a little bit heavier that you might not normally be able to. This leads nicely into a discussion of skill feats themselves. Which skill feats should you take for the Anathamaru, and which ones might be worth avoiding? There are two skill feats that I feel are very, very important to consider for this build, and there are two skill feats that I would caution you and urge you to talk to your storyteller before taking them, and then we'll talk about some generalities past that. The two skill feats that I think are very on point are Trick Magic Item and Skill Training. It should be very clear how Trick Magic Item leans into the idea behind this character. The Anathamaru is trying to steal divine magic, so the idea of the Anathamaru stealing divine items and then tricking those items so that they can use them, even though that is not the will of the gods, that seems very on point for this character, and I would definitely pick up the Trick Magic Item skill feat. Another one that is a solid consideration is the Skill Training skill feat, which does exactly what it says on the tin and gives you training in an additional skill. You may remember earlier in the discussion, one of the big challenges in this build is having enough skills, and there's kind of two ways to give yourself enough access. Option number one is increase intelligence up to +3 or +4. Option number two is put some skill training feats in there, and you can mix and match these depending on what you feel is best for your character. If you like the idea of leaning into intelligence, that is a completely valid pick, but if you have some other things that you would rather be boosting and you don't particularly care about intelligence, you can totally throw a few skill training feats in there, and that will also help you get over the mark that you're trying to hit. So all in all, Trick Magic Items and skill training, those are very solid investments. The two skill feats I would encourage you to be cautious about are Godless Healing and Mortal Healing, which are skill feats from the Lost Omens line of books. Now, thematically, both of these feats are strong picks. Godless Healing and Mortal Healing essentially allow you to be better at healing people without the intervention of the gods. Is that exactly the flavor we're going for? Yes. However, the second feat in that series, Mortal Healing, triggers on whether or not a target has been influenced by divine magic, not divine influence. And that's kind of the hang-up I have with these feats. Because you are a divine spellcaster, the spells that you are using, even though you've stolen that power from the gods, still runs up against the restrictions of the Mortal Healing feat. There are some mechanical game design reasons behind this, and that means that mechanically, at least the second feat, Mortal Healing, is not necessarily a good choice for you. Now, if you are interested in those two feats because, again, they are very thematic, you could talk to your storyteller and see if you can work out some way to use them or use them in a limited capacity. I would advise any storyteller considering this that you think about the mechanical balance behind the design of those feats. I'm not saying that they're absolutely off limits, but there are some weird mechanical interactions, so they're not feats I would automatically go to for the Anathamaru build, even if they are incredibly thematic. So when it comes to Godless Healing and Mortal Healing, approach those with some caution if you are interested. As for other skill feats in the game, really, it's wide open to you. There are a lot of different things that could be very on brand for this character. Now, there is one skill feat that I think is on brand, but that you probably won't have access to, and that is the Deceptive Worship skill feat that is actually tied to the Occultism skill. As we have built this character, you probably are not trained in Occultism, but if you manage to pick Occultism up, this skill feat would be completely on point and totally appropriate to the character you're playing. Past that, here are a few options that jumped out to me in no particular order. You can take any or all of these as you see fit. Read Lips, Terrain Stalker, Forager, Subtle Theft, Underwater Marauder, Quick Swim, Communal Crafting, Snare Crafting, No Cause for Alarm, Group Impression, Battle Medicine, and Dirty Trick. All of those skill feats seem very on point for the Anathamaru. Any of them would be a solid recommendation for this build. And then, past the 12 that I just mentioned, literally any skill feat for Deception, Intimidation, or Medicine is on point for your character. Totally something that could play into what this character build's trying to do. So any of those skill feats are worth considering. Again, when it comes to skill increases, general feats, and skill feats, you've got a wide variety of options that could all be effective for your character, and you would want to think about what's the best fit to the actual story and campaign you're running, but you definitely have a wide selection of things that could work well for this character. As for gear, I'm not even going to touch gear in this video because honestly, the main thing you need to know for this build is steal as many divine items as you can and then use the trick magic item feat to further infuriate the gods, and you're probably on the right track, but beyond that you can totally go with whatever gear you like best. And with all of that, we have successfully built the Anathamaru. We have built the fishfolk that is ready to defy all of the gods of Golarion. It is seriously weird how much my brain would not let that tangent go. So with all of that, the time has come to turn this conversation over to you. What do you think about the Anathamaru build, and what do you think about the new design of the Oracle in the Pathfinder 2e remaster? Do you like the changes in the Oracle that we highlighted in this video? Or do you prefer the legacy version of the class? And how would you build an Anathamaru if you were going to try to create this character? Jump down to the comments section and let me know your thoughts. And just as a reminder, shortly after this video goes live, I'm going to be driving to Indianapolis where I'm going to be attending Gen Con. So if you're going to be at Gen Con, definitely look me up at the event. I would love to meet you. I'd love to talk to you. And if you're interested in being in a Gen Con Silly survey, just let me know and I'd be glad to let you take part in that. As always, don't forget to do all of the other stuff that helps to support this channel. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. You can check out my free Discord and my Patreon. All of those links are going to be in the video description. But as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for being part of the conversation. Have a wonderful day.